So today I am talking about The Sicilian by Mario Puzo. And this might seem like an odd one for me, but it's actually the fourth book I ever read, and I just recently re-listened to the audio book as I tend to do. And yeah, back in the day when I first started reading, like I was very fascinated with the American mafia. A very niche fascination with that crime genre. And The Godfather was the first book I ever read, which Mario obviously also wrote. And yeah, so I had this real fascination with it, and then obviously over the years, my tastes have changed. So it might seem like an odd one now, but back in the day, I read a lot of Mario's books in particular, and a lot of uh, true crime books actually about the American mafia. So this one is actually um, it's pretty good. If you're into crime, if you're into the American Mafia or the Sicilian Mafia, it's definitely worth a read. It's based on a true story about a Salvatore Giuliano who was an outlaw bandit in Sicily that sort of took on the mafia, took on the government, and yeah, it's an interesting sort of read. Mario really romanticizes it, his banditry, and makes him out to be a modern day Robin Hood. But I've also read that elsewhere too. I used to have a photo of Salvatore um, in a true crime book, but I couldn't find it the other day. So I believe I've gotten rid of that over the years. Yeah, so he was sort of been romanticized as this, Robin Hood type figure where he give to the poor, and that he's very politically active. Sort of centers after World War II, after the um, Allies invaded Sicily and Italy. And there's a weird Godfather tie-in. If you know the Godfather story, when Michael's overseas after shooting Salozzo and the police captain, the Mario's linked it to just before he comes back, they're gonna rescue Salvatore and bring him back to America. All right, spoiler alert. It is a true story, so you know um, he doesn't make that trip with Michael Corleone. But yeah, it's an interesting story. The thing I love about it is the history that in books like this and other books like I used to read early days that had sort of told me a lot about the Sicilian history and the politics and stuff like that I didn't know, and they're the reasons we read. Sometimes it's to escape, sometimes to learn, and sometimes you can do both. In escape into a story that's entertaining and interesting, but also teach you about histories and strange places and customs, and that's definitely why we read. It's why we're fascinated by books. And re-listening to this recently, connected with that how it sort of all came about and the politics, and but Mario does very much romanticize the mafia and organized crime in that state, even though that organized crime is a little bit of the enemy, but they're men of honor and stuff like that. And this was sort of at the cusp. There was a big incident with Salvatore Giuliano and the Porta di Ginestra. I've probably said that wrong, even though I have listened to someone else say it very often. It was a political rally, I think a socialist rally, and they were supposed to be like scare them off with machine guns, and there's a bit of a sort of did it really happen? And apparently Salvador's bandits opened fire on the crowd and killed a bunch of people and injured a lot more. Um, and so that sort of rubbed the sheen off him of this Robin Hood like figure. But there is a thing where they didn't believe he'd actually done it. Um, it might have been someone else. There was always a theory, and Mario very much plays into that. It was a betrayal of him and a setup, because he very much romanticized this figure. But he did kill a lot of Carbonari, the Italian police that used to come down and crack onto the mafia. And this was really at the cusp of the time before the heroin trade blew up in Sicily and that. And and then what the Sicilian mafia and that, and did, and basically killing judges and police officers and civilians, and the mass wars that over the drug trade really blew up. So this was sort of before that, when there was a time of innocence in the mafia. I don't know if you put it that way. Um, so you can sort of believe a little bit of the romanticism around this outlaw bandit Robin Hood type figure before it really got into just hard boiled masochistic criminals fighting over the drug trade. So yeah, it's definitely worth a read if you're into this kind of stuff. It was nice to sort of go back. The narrator wasn't brilliant with some of the accents. It was a bit funny, particularly Michael's. You know, you think of Michael as that young Al Pacino voice, and it didn't sound like that at all. Didn't sound really Italian American at all, or Sicilian at all. Um, but yeah, so the narrator would have been good in other books, in other characters, and that he did all right. But just yeah, Michael didn't. I don't think he did that well in the scenes that he was there. But certainly, Sicilian, it's an old throwback, but it's definitely a book worth reading. If, like again said, if you're into that true crime, organized crime caper, it's an interesting one, and yeah, one I enjoyed going back to. I loved it back in the day because I was just fascinated, and I wanted to devour everything about organized crime and the mafia and the Sicilian mafia. So yeah, it was very niche. My taste has very much changed, as you'll see with other other reviews I've uploaded, and certainly the books I'm planning on reading very shortly. But yeah, Mario Puzo's The Sicilian. Happy reading. Subscribe and follow for more.